Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 276, we got a highly anticipated bantamweight matchup. Pedro Munhoz versus Sean O'Malley. We were finally seeing Sean O'Malley tested against a top 10 in the bantamweight division. Everyone was curious, how is he going to make out against an absolute savage like Pedro Munhoz? Unfortunately, we were all left disappointed. The fight ended. Second round, inadvertent eye poke from Sean O'Malley. We got a doctor stoppage after Pedro Munhoz was unable to open his eye. He said he could not see. So unfortunately, the doctor, had to waive the fight off. But there's been a lot of talk since this fight ended. And there's been some insinuation by Sean O'Malley and a lot of Sean O'Malley fans and just MMA fans in general, not necessarily all of them are Sean O'Malley fans, saying that Pedro Munhoz quit. Pedro Munhoz wanted out. And I'm going to talk about it in this video. I did a whole UFC 276 post-fight live stream. I will link that down in the description. That is an hour and I think about an hour and a half if you guys want to check it out after this. But I wanted to make a dedicated video on Sean O'Malley versus Pedro Munhoz and this whole eye poke situation because I feel like it's going to be something that's going to be talked about for literal months. So first off, how did the fight go? First off, going into this fight, I thought that Sean O'Malley was just taller, longer, better striking. I thought he was going to stay at range, pick Pedro Munhoz apart, and win a decision. Pedro Munhoz has a granite chin. I did not see Sean O'Malley finishing Pedro Munhoz. But how did this fight actually go? The first round, Pedro Munhoz was slamming leg kicks over and over and over again. He was not just kicking to the calf, he was also kicking to the thigh of Sean O'Malley. Now, credit to Sean O'Malley. He did check quite a few of these leg kicks. But Pedro Munhoz must have thrown 30 of these leg kicks. And I would say maybe 15 to 20 of them landed. And in this round, Pedro Munhoz is very dangerous. Pedro Munhoz has great power himself. O'Malley had the reach advantage. O'Malley was staying at range. He was landing some good jabs. But he wasn't super active. I think he was kind of trying to get the timing for Pedro Munhoz and looking to open up later in the fight. And going in at the end of the first round, I thought it was pretty clear that Pedro Munhoz won the first round off of leg kicks alone. I've only watched it one time. I have to go back and rewatch it. But I thought it was a clear 10-9 round for Pedro Munhoz. Sean O'Malley landed a couple jabs. I think he landed one really hard leg kick of his own. And I get it. He did check a couple kicks. He was turning the shin in. But Pedro Munhoz landed quite a few of those kicks. And I believe they were the most damaging shots of the entire round. So I think Pedro Munhoz won the first round 10-9. So the second round comes out. We only got about half of the second round. And in this round, Sean O'Malley was starting to get the timing of Pedro Munhoz. He was landing some good shots, but it was a very competitive round as well. Pedro Munhoz wasn't landing nowhere near as many leg kicks. He was having trouble finding the range. I mean, I don't think he punched O'Malley in the face the entire fight, which lasted about 8 minutes or so. And Sean O'Malley was starting to get, just landing better on the feet, using his striking, using his length, and kind of busting Pedro Munhoz up a little bit. But it wasn't nothing definitive. It was still a competitive round. Pedro Munhoz was still landing some leg kicks. But if you ended the round halfway through, which the round did end halfway through, I would give that second round to Sean O'Malley 10-9. But it wasn't a particularly definitive round, and we only got about 2 or 3 minutes of the second round before we got the eye poke from Sean O'Malley and then the eventual stoppage of the fight. So first off, as far as the eye poke, I know a lot of times there's guys that eye poke other guys and everyone's saying this, it's dirty, this and that. Sean O'Malley had his fingers straight up. So Sean O'Malley, he did everything he could do to avoid poking Pedro Munhoz in the eye. It just happened. Pedro Munhoz was moving in. Sean O'Malley had his fingers up, and just because of the height disadvantage and because of where O'Malley's hand ended up and because where Pedro Munhoz pressured in, he ends up getting poked in the eye, and the fight ends up getting stopped. First off, for those of you saying, oh, it was barely an eye poke, this and that, you guys don't know what an eye poke is like because an eye poke is terrible. I'd like to poke you in the eye. If you're saying, we don't know what these guys are going through when they get poked in the eye. And I would be saying this exact same thing for Sean O'Malley had the roles been reversed. And I get it. It didn't look as bad as some of the ones we've seen where guys have gone knuckle deep in the eye and, it's clearly a really bad eye poke. We've seen this happen multiple times in various different fights. I get it didn't look that bad, but it's still an eye poke. If you've ever got dust in your eye, there's times that I've gotten dust in my eye and I haven't been able to open it up for 10 or 15 minutes. That has happened in my life. Imagine getting poked in the eye. And it was right in the cornea of Pedro Munhoz's eye. Again, it was not Sean O'Malley's fault. It was inadvertent. And now, because Pedro Munhoz said he could not continue, people are saying Pedro Munhoz quit because I don't know why. I don't know what their reasoning for it is, but I know what Sean O'Malley's reasoning for it is, and we're going to get to that in a second. But for me, first off, people saying it wasn't an eye poke. It was clearly an eye poke. Go back and watch the replay. They showed it multiple times. The finger went in the eye. But besides that, if you're saying that, you're just crazy because you're not watching the replay. But besides that, we don't know what Pedro was going through after that eye poke. He tried to wipe it out. I get he didn't take the full 5 minutes, but the doctor was there. The ref was there. They were kind of pressuring him. Can you see? Can you see? Can you see? They gave him time. I think he was there for 3 or 4 minutes anyway, so it was getting close to being time's up, and he could not continue. And so he was stopped. There was doctor stoppage, and now the fight's over, and we get a very disappointing ending to the fight. And now people are saying he quit in the fight. First off, Pedro Munhoz has went to war with Cody Garbrandt. That was a wild, crazy fight where he was lit up multiple times. Continues just marching forward, throwing nasty shots. I mean, he got destroyed by Jose Aldo. Now, I mean, destroyed's kind of a little bit of an exaggeration, but he got outclassed by Jose Aldo back in September of last year. Pedro Munhoz is an absolute savage. Pedro Munhoz is not looking for an easy way out. And I would be sympathetic to this argument. But it's not like Pedro Munhoz was getting absolutely destroyed. It's not like it's the 4th round of Volkanovski versus Max Holloway, and that's the situation that Munhoz was in. He's Max Holloway in that situation. And he's like, you know what? I'm getting brutalized in this fight. I'm not going to win. I have no chance to win. I got eye poked. This is my chance out. This was a 50-50 fight. Munhoz had won the first round. In my opinion, the second round was going O'Malley's way. By no means was anybody dominating this fight. Sean O'Malley came out and said, I was dominating this fight. I checked every kick. I was lighting him up. It was a matter of time before I put his lights out. That requires a lot of positive thinking on Sean O'Malley's part. We have no idea how this fight would have gone, because we didn't get to see it play out. I'm not saying Pedro Munhoz would have won. I'm not saying Sean O'Malley would have won. But anyone saying they know definitively who would have won that fight. There are certain fights that get stopped and we can say, okay, we know what would have happened. An example, in my case, I seen the Masvidal-Nate Diaz stoppage. I was there live. I knew what was going to happen. I know Nate Diaz tends to come back in the later rounds, but I had saw enough. Masvidal brutalized him in that fight, and I did not need to see anymore. Even though, the cut stoppage, maybe had it been in Las Vegas instead of New York, may have not happened. But this O'Malley-Munhoz fight was not that case. Nobody was dominating the fight. It was a very competitive fight, and I really thought it was just starting to heat up. Pedro Munhoz was really starting to pressure. O'Malley was starting to land some better shots on the feet than he had done in the first round, and I really thought he was starting to get the timing of Pedro Munhoz. But we don't know what would have happened. First off, Pedro Munhoz has a granite chin. He's never been knocked out in his MMA career. So to come out and say, oh, I was getting ready to turn his lights out. I know O'Malley is just kind of halfway trolling, but I really think he believes this type of stuff. And he surrounds himself by yes men. And as far as takeaways from the fight, I don't think there's a lot of takeaways. I can't tell. Up until this point, I have said that Sean O'Malley is overrated. And the reason I'm saying that, I actually think Sean O'Malley has great skills. But the reason I've said that is because he hasn't fought high caliber opponents. And there's people saying, oh, I want to see him fight Petr Yan. I think he's a championship material. Out of all the opponents he's fought, he has one win over a current UFC roster fighter. And that may be debatable. Raulian Paiva, I think he's still in the UFC roster. He just lost his most recent fight. He could be on the chopping block. But that's the only win Sean O'Malley has over a UFC fighter right now. The only other UFC fighter he fought was Marlon Chito Vera, and we know what happened in this fight. And this is why I made this video, because this is a very similar situation. In that fight, it was 50-50. Sean O'Malley maybe had the edge in strikes, but it was very even in that first round. And then Chito Vera brutally chopped that leg, hit that nerve in the leg, gave Sean O'Malley drop foot, and then shucked him to the ground a few minutes later after O'Malley tried to circle around the cage. And he had some success on the feet, but it was a very competitive fight, a very even fight. He got shucked to the ground and then brutally flash KO'd with ground and pound elbows and then stretchered out of the cage with no serious injury. And after this fight, Sean O'Malley says, I'm undefeated. I was getting ready to whoop his ass. You know, this and that, just reshaping the narrative. And people buy into this. They say, oh, well, he was going to beat Chito. The fight was 50-50. Anybody saying that O'Malley was outclassing Chito Vera before that nerve hit, it was like 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes into the fight. What were you watching? And it was very even. Sean O'Malley may have had the slight edge, and he landed some good heavy leg kicks, but it was an even fight. And now they're trying to do the same thing with this fight. We don't know who's the better fighter. We don't know whether it's O'Malley or Pedro Munhoz. We still haven't seen O'Malley fully test it because this fight, both guys were kind of tentative in the first round. Pedro Munhoz was being very defensively responsible. He was just kicking the legs. Sean O'Malley wasn't super loose in the first round, especially with his hands. He was worried about checking the kicks. He was worried about the power of Pedro Munhoz. He was worried about getting the timing and just getting the reads on Pedro Munhoz. We don't know who would have won this fight. And I believe the only answer to that is to rebook it. We need to see Pedro Munhoz versus Sean O'Malley too. I think this was perfect matchmaking by the UFC. I think Pedro Munhoz was a good step up in competition for Sean O'Malley after fighting all these trash cans for so long outside of Marlon Vera and Raulian Paiva, fighting all these guys who are no longer in the UFC and were borderline UFC fighters when he fought them. And now he's been in the UFC for a while. It was time to see him fight a top 10 guy. He's already sitting in the top 15. I don't remember exactly where O'Malley was. I think he was 12 or 13 in the rankings. I want to see him against Pedro Munhoz. I want to see how he deals with the leg kicks. I favor O'Malley to win that fight. But in this fight, nobody can concretely say that Sean O'Malley was going to beat Pedro Munhoz. Anybody saying that is delusional. And, you know, anybody saying that Pedro Munhoz, who's an absolute savage, is looking for a way out of a fight that does not pass the sniff test. Pedro Munhoz was not losing this fight. It's not like he was badly hurt. It's not like, you know, he was just looking for a way out because he knew he was going to lose. That doesn't make any sense. It does not make any sense. And this reminds me of the Yair Jeremy Stevens situation. And it's just really not a good look when you injure a guy with an illegal tactic, whether it's advertent or inadvertent, and then you celebrate the victory. The doctor waves, or the doctor tells the ref to wave it off. The ref waves it off. And then you're celebrating in the center of the octagon when you barely, you know, you didn't do a whole lot to win the fight. The fight didn't play out. We didn't even get half the fight. And you're celebrating because you eye poked the guy inadvertently as it was. The fingers were straight up. And now you're celebrating a win. We need to see this fight ran back. I think O'Malley fans will agree with me. I think the majority of MMA fans will agree with me. I think this is the fight to make. What other fight are you going to make? Are you going to book him against Petr Yan? Because I think that's a death sentence for Sean O'Malley. If he's getting stretchered out because of Chito Vera's leg kicks, he's going to be airlifted out by the likes of Petr Yan or even Jose Aldo. Can you imagine Jose Aldo getting a hold of Sean O'Malley's legs? I want to see this fight booked. I do not think Pedro Munhoz was looking for an easy way out of a fight that was 50-50 and he had won the first round, arguably. That was not what was going on in this fight. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. What fight do you want to see next for Sean O'Malley? Do you want to see this rematch, or you say you've seen enough and you want to see Sean O'Malley move on to, you know, a top 5 ranked fighter in the bantamweight division? Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.